Welcome everyone to the International Mentoring Community, All Things Mentoring Lounge. Great to have you with us. Doug and I so appreciate you showing up and joining us so we can learn and share and sort of extend our understanding of mentoring, both from a concept point of view and a practice point of view. Today, what we're going to be taking a look at is this connection between mentoring and this sort of unsettling mental health issues that are certainly finding themselves in our communities today for a number of reasons, some recent, others sometimes history brings them forward within a person's life. And what we're wanting to do is just make this sort of connection between the contribution of mentors and mental health issues. And Doug has a great practice going on, and he is certainly doing a lot of connection between this mentoring and mental health. And I asked if he would be willing to sort of, in a way, he's been doing podcasts a lot. And I said, hey, listen, why don't we do our live broadcast here and get you involved sort of like we're doing a podcast. And he said, sure. And we sort of said, okay, well, we're going to put something together. I'm not quite sure how long it's going to take, Doug. I don't think you know either. We're just going to do it. And if there's questions that come in, we'll certainly answer those as they unfold. But I think it might be just worth everyone understanding a little bit about who we are, who's the International Mentoring Community, if they're new to it. You want to introduce yourself, Doug?
Sure can. I'm Doug Lawrence, and I am the co-founder of the International Mentoring Community, and I also have my own practice through Talent C People Services Incorporated. With the International Mentoring Community, I'm the Director of Practice and Outreach.
And Doug has a very deep practice. He is mentoring all the time. So by comparison, I'm not quite as much. But my role is the Director of Education and Verification, Certification, and that's what I contribute. I have my own company, Wealth Movement. Almost gave my old company name. So Wealth Movement. And we got together and founded IMC about 4 years ago, and we're moving forward. We're going to be offering some new programming coming up here soon. So stay tuned and sort of pop in and see if we can be of service to you. And obviously, we would encourage you to continue to interact with us. And if you find yourself near that subscribe button, please click it, and that'd be great. And again, what I mentioned earlier is the broadcast is about connecting this contribution of mentors and this unsettling mental health issues. And just as a place to get this started, Doug, before I ask you a couple of questions, get going, then it'll become a little bit more conversational, folks, just so that you know. One of the words that I use, or two words that I use that certainly speaks to what's happening in our world and our lives with our planet from the whole is there's a lot of noise out there. And what we're looking to encourage is finding the news. And news is spelled N-E-W-S-S. And the last S is for this notion of the value of safety and safe systems and safer practices. This noise often gets in the way and sort of grinds people down. It takes people down rabbit holes and places that sometimes isn't in the best, and it sort of crowds in on you. And that's why, from a news point of view, is what can we give you that give you a better understanding of what's taking place, so you can discover and shape a life that is what you would like to live, your extraordinary life. And that's why we are in this pursuit of certifying mentors, move them sort of good, great, remarkable, memorable to this notion of extraordinary. And Doug and I are committed to that. And I think it would be important for us to get started by just sharing what is mentoring. And if I may, Doug, I'll just sort of take a shot at for us to understand it, and then I've got a couple of questions that's linked to mental health and acronyms that are associated with mental health. So for us at IMC, mentoring is a two-way trusted relationship. I sometimes will use alliance as a word there, where the mentor and mentee are learning and growing together through personal and professional development. And we're sharing it's the mentor and mentee, two-way trusted. So they're in there together doing it, because often a mentor can be the mentee to the mentee, who that mentee becomes a mentor. I know it sounds a little bit flipping it around, but it's true. And that's why Doug and I so appreciate this notion of mentoring, is that if you're truly open to this relationship, this alliance, this respectful, trusting way in which to come together, it's just a wonderful way in which to be with another person and to learn both personally and professionally. So I wanted to share that sort of opening up, because from Doug's point of view, he has been moving around, and I'm going to use it that sense, moving around, if you can picture that, in this mental health world. And just before we look at a definition of mental health and a couple of the acronyms, Doug, I think it'd be important a little bit about why you got into mentoring in the mental health area, and you've written a book about it. Just share a little bit so that people can come to understand who's Doug Lawrence on all of this.
I can certainly do that. One thing that, for the benefit of our listeners, is the whole idea around the definition that you gave, which spoke to personal and professional growth, through the development process. The one thing that I have found with my practice is that if we don't do the self-care, if we don't look at the personal growth of an individual, that can sometimes become an obstacle or a barrier to us being able to move forward with literally and everything. And so I wanted to bring that to everybody's attention. Is a lot of corporate mentoring programs focus purely on the professional development and not on the personal, and that sometimes can be a bit of an error or a flaw in the process, and they need to get kind of back on track. Now, to come back in roundabout way to get to the answer to your question, so I went through, I've written 2 books, and the first book, The Gift of Mentoring, was written as a result of a number of people saying, Doug, you're writing all these blog articles. Why don't you put this into a book? Because there's a lot of great content and stuff that was there. And so I did. I published The Gift of Mentoring in 2014. And then much the same thing started to happen, where I was mentoring people that were dealing with mental health challenges. And some of my advisors, some of my mentors said, it's that time again, Doug, for you to write another book based on your experiences that you've been having. And it's very timely, because the whole mental health space needs some champions to be able to move it forward in the right direction. And we think that you writing that book will help with that journey towards guiding people towards their healing journey. And so I did write the book, and it was published in just this past January. And You Are Not Alone is all about mentoring and mental health, and how mentoring can be part of the support structure for mental health.
Great. And I think our own personal stories are going to pop out as we move through this. So it'd probably be wise of us to just establish what we understand mental health to be about. And then, as I mentioned, there's a couple of acronyms that I think would be worth exploring that tend to be associated with mental health. So your understanding of mental health, I'll put the word like definition, but your understanding of it, so people could get in touch with you on this.
So it includes emotional, psychological, and social well-being. That's basically it. It affects how we think, feel, and act. And it also determines how we handle stress and how we relate to others and how we make healthy or we don't make healthy choices. And what's interesting is when we take a look at the whole mental health landscape, over 1 billion people today globally have a mental disorder, and approximately 450 million of those people are not getting the treatment that they need in order to address their mental health condition. 450 million people not getting the help that they need.
Yeah, and sometimes that's because of that noise. They're taken away from where they might be able to ask to get the news. If I was to make that connection again, but sometimes it's about something gets in the way of them. Just how do I ask for it? And I think that's why we want to bring a more attention to it. But if I could go back into you gave the sense of the psychological and the social, which brings out this notion of thinking and feeling, but it's also, it really shows itself up in the physical aspect, which is you sort of mentioned think, feel, and act, right? And from that action point of view, it's withdrawing often from being right the who you would so much like to be. You withdraw. Is there anything you would want to add around that notion of the physical aspect of it, the manifesting, the materializing of it from a physical point of view? Even using a personal example.
You wanted to lead me down that path anyhow. So, you know, from the physical. So for me, what happens is it's a bit of a chain reaction. So I experience something. As a result of me experiencing something, my body reacts to that in a certain way. So, and my body, when I say my body reacts to it, I mentally react to that particular situation, which then leads me to cause a physical reaction to what I've experienced. So, as an example, you experience a motor vehicle accident where you may be an occupant of the vehicle and you end up getting injured. So your body has experienced a physical trauma, and then your mind starts to, you start to think of all sorts of different potential outcomes and all of that stuff. So your body now is starting to react from a mental perspective. And it's when that starts to happen, a number of other things fall into places. Your body is trying to, and your mind is trying to figure out, how do I rationalize what took place? And then what happens on top of that is then when you see other things, they trigger memories of that particular situation that happened. And it could be like I told a story here just the other day of a young person that committed suicide, and how that has impacted me. And that was, gosh, 40 some odd years ago. And I still relive that experience. I still experience how I felt at that particular time point. And that's over 40 years ago.
Yeah. Well, I bring it up because in my own life, I've had three major episodes, and I'll acknowledge it. The first two, I didn't really know what was going on. I got help, and it really was helpful. And I find myself, from a physical point of view, this notion of the withdrawing, yes, you could think of it mentally, but physically, I was just withdrawing, and I felt myself constricting and constricting. And what helped me at both those times was I started walking again, right? Open up physically. And that's why I bring it forward, because sometimes people think about, well, I go off, but it may physically show up, and you just pay attention to what's happening to you physically. as well. And I know that the third time is that when I started to feel it and physically started to feel that contraction was when I actually reached out faster than I did the first two times. Okay. And it was actually with the assistance of a mentor. And I thought that that was is really great. And I'll explain a little bit more about it because I think we'll talk about it because there's these two acronyms, PTSD and OSI. And I think it would be worth unpacking those. So if you'd like to just start with the PTSD and then we'll do the OSI so we might understand what those have to do with this mental health and we'll then make the connection with mentoring.
And the one thing I wanted to just point out was you had talked about going for walks, and that became a coping mechanism for you, that for you to be able to deal with the trauma and all of that. Walking is sometimes, it's a great coping mechanism, especially when it causes you to react to the trauma in the fashion that you did. So there's that part. So with post-traumatic stress and operational, OSI is operational stress injury. And the best way to take a look at what's different between the two is that OSI, or operational stress injury, is related to individuals that are in law enforcement, combat, or any other service-related duties. So it wouldn't be the person who works in the corporate world and is bullied by a supervisor or by a co-worker, resulting in them ending up with mental health challenges. So the difference between PTSD and OSI is PTSD can apply to everybody. And it's not just first responders, law enforcement, and that it's everybody. It can be that young child that is going to school that's being bullied, who ends up experiencing all kind of trauma as a result of that. That's post-traumatic stress disorder, or can be PTSD. If you have the EMS attendant that's riding in the ambulance, dealing with all kinds of different injuries and stuff like that, that is OSI, or excuse me, operational stress injury. That's the difference between the two. The statistics are that approximately with post-traumatic stress is that about 20% of the people who experience trauma will actually develop post-traumatic stress. And I think it's about 8 million people have PTSD in a given year. So that's how we separate between the two. And it's not intended where we look at it from the aspect of, well, you're not from the service industry, so therefore you can't have post-traumatic stress. And that, yes, you can. You actually, the average citizen who has experienced trauma and that does in fact experience PTSD. They're not categorized under the OSI umbrella, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, you have your own story of this PTSD OSI, as I do. And do you want to go first and share a little bit about it so we might understand it?
Yeah, I certainly can. So when I was stationed, and there's a number of different stories that I can obviously talk about, but one that is still extremely vivid, despite the fact that it happened 40 some odd years ago, but was I was stationed in northern British Columbia as a member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and we had a community hockey team that was selecting its team members, and we were going to travel down the highway and we were going to take on the neighboring community in a hockey game. And we had a young lad, 16 years of age, and he tried out for the team and he actually did very, very well. Suffice it to say, good enough that offered him a chance to play on the team, and he was all excited about that. And got to remember, here's a 16-year-old who's now being invited to play with with the men, and he was quite pleased about all of this, and went home to share his good news with his parents, only to find them inebriated beyond recognition, and just they didn't even give him the time of day, didn't acknowledge anything. And so his reaction to that was he went and got a 22 rifle and took his own life. And I ended up getting sent to go and investigate the sudden death. And there's a whole sequence of events and stuff. Long story short was that we were in northern British Columbia. We had to transport him out to the nearest morgue so that they could do an autopsy, because it was a sudden death and all that stuff. And it was in the middle of winter. It was like 35, 40 below, and it was an 8-hour drive to get to the morgue, the closest morgue. And so, we had to, load him into the back of the vehicle. And ironically, my soon-to-be wife ended up being shoulder tapped to go with me, so that I wasn't traveling by myself in the middle of winter and stuff like that. And, we went through a number of different things that we had to experience, some of it together, some of it not. Certainly I needed her help when we got to the morgue to lift the body out of the body bag and all those sorts of things. And I guess that has had a huge impact on me. And what it causes for me was, every time that I had those incidents, I reverted to alcohol, and I became a belligerent, ignorant so-and-so. And as a result of that, it was, fortunately at that time, if that can even be a term, but at that particular time point, it was just my wife, Deborah, and I. And so we had no children that would be subjected to the verbal abuse that came out of me. And that was my reaction to dealing. That was my coping mechanism, was drink more alcohol and rant and rave at whoever was around. And, watching my inner circle of people get smaller and smaller and smaller as I was pushing them away because of my bad behavior. And so, that was 40 some odd years ago, and I still relive that. It's still very vivid.
Yeah, and I understand, and thanks for sharing. I appreciate it, because I think often the examples help people to understand what we're attempting to get to here. And it'll certainly come back to the story of mentoring, which we'll get to. But I thought I'd share just a little bit about one of the ones that I went through, which was, it's sort of a cross between an OSI and a PTSD. Most people call it PTSD, even though it was associated with war and conflict. And there was experiences that I had when I was in Africa working, and the sights that I saw, the sounds, what was going on, because I was rebels fighting the government forces, was one time. The next time was again the rebels fighting the government forces, and what humans do to humans. Like, it's unbelievable, the atrocities and everything. And going to field hospitals and seeing the effects of people standing on landmines and them blowing up, or the effects of a pharmacy or a medical clinic where the rebels came in and took everything out, and looking at the mothers and daughters and what was happening to them, and all that. And I remember it, and I put it away, right? And it wasn't until I got back and it came out about 10 years later, I found myself sort of and I'll use the word withdrawing, and I've used it already. I was withdrawing, I was shrinking inside myself. I couldn't figure out what it was about. Got some assistance, got myself up, but I didn't fully understand the story in the background because it was so deep into me physically, right? And the second time it happened was associated with, I was finishing up a major project and found myself spinning in a chair. And I went, this is not who I am. And again, my best description is I was shrinking again, right? And so I just went, no, this has to be taken care of. And it was the third time that I came to understand, and I made the connection. And again, I was shrinking, right? Just physically shrinking. I can't do this. This is just not who I am. And that's when I got some assistance from a different perspective. And that's what really made a difference for me. So while it was in a combat military situation, all right, I wasn't, I was working with an agency that was supporting what was going on in the war zones. But so I call it the PTSD rather than the OSI because, you know, and a reflection of who I was and what I was doing at the time. But it took me a little bit to unearth it. And I'm using that because of that shrinking of sort of piling things on me and becoming smaller until I realized, whoa, hang on a minute. Well, no, I got to take care of this. And it opened up. And that's what got me into asking someone to, in a mentor-mentee, I was the mentee they were mentoring me. And what they were able to do through a mentoring kind of conversation was open up another way for me to look at this, right? So it didn't get into like the clinical, nothing against the psychologists and all that, but sometimes they have a way of doing things, and there's other ways in which to take a look at the possibility of the story and unfolding it. And I think that's where Doug and I lean into this world of the role of the mentor, their mentor's contribution to these unsettling mental health issues. And can you just speak to this notion of the role of the mentor in the mental health area? And then maybe we can talk about a few things, things like grief and maybe some triggers, right, that might help other people understand what might be happening to them in their own lives. Like, I know we gave our examples, but there's more to it, I think. But let's just unfold the role of the mentor, I think. And you have this deep practice, so I turn to you and ask, what would you like to share?
You know, with being a mentor and working in that mental health space, it's how I view it and how I'm using it as part of my practice is that I am the bridge between the time that's going to expire from when you first saw your professional help, whether it be a counselor, social work, psychologist, psychiatrist. So in between that time and your next appointment, I am the bridge. I am the person that will take you by the hand and stand with you and say, you know, if you need to talk, I am here to listen. I am not here to pass judgment. I am only here to listen and hear what it is that you want to share with me. And I want you to know that it's in the utmost of confidence. I want you to understand that it is with the intent to create a safe place for this conversation to take place and for you to feel safe in that environment as well. And so, long story short is that mentoring is part of the support structure for mental health. So it's fulfilling that void where you happen to hear people, you talk to people, you know, oh yes, I've been diagnosed with bipolar and I see my psychiatrist or my psychologist or whoever, my professional counselor, I see them once a month. And, you know, me being me, I'm going like, holy crow, that's what happens during that month time frame. And it was a logical choice a logical role for mentoring to play in that support structure. And it has been working well with a lot of the people that I have been working with, and who seem to find their way to me sometimes in some of the strangest ways, but they do find their way to me, and we just begin to have those conversations. And sometimes, like I said, it's just me listening and hearing what it is they have to say.
Yeah. Well, the mentor who helped me the third time, who really got me out of it using this mentoring approach, she used a lot of metaphors and a lot of story sharing. Mm-hmm. And so we were talking about a dam and fingers and things, and what can you do in the immediate to be able to deal with something, and then the stories, which would allow me to sort of go, okay, I can find a path through this. And it was just the way that she did it that I was so impressed with. And I realized that what she was doing was mentoring. Okay. And I thank her to this day, because I have my own coping skills because of that approach that helped me. I'm not saying that other counselors or psychologists or anything like that are not using story sharing or metaphors or anything like that, but it was just, she came at it through a little bit of a different lens, which we call this mentoring two-way trusted a relationship where you both grow together. And I could see where she was growing with me. And I think what that did was I sort of went, okay, I'm sharing some things and I hear her stories. And it was just kind of, it was just a great way for it to unfold. So she awakened some coping skills in me. She gave some ideas to me. I gave some things to her that she could use later. And that was what was happening. But I think what she did was she really helped me find those trigger points, right? Those triggers, the prompts to get me to reflection rather than just trigger, right? And move me along that. Any thoughts towards, I'm using coping skills and triggers and prompts and reflection here. Anything from weaving that into mentoring from your perspective?
Well, I know the coping skills are really important, and I also know you need to be able to recognize when you are being triggered, and ideally you need to have something in place to be able to cope with those triggers. And that's where sometimes the services of a professional counselor or a psychologist or psychiatrist, because I've gone through some of that myself, where I was experiencing different triggers, and I was taken through an exercise that helped me take and put all those things that were sort of that I was viewing as negative as an example. So I lost my wife to cancer, and what would end up happening is if I drove by the hospital where she had passed away, that would trigger all kinds of emotion and all of that. And what the professional counselor had me do was to visualize taking all of those thoughts and emotions and all of that and putting them in a box, and visualize them being put in that box and being put on a shelf someplace out of sight, out of mind. And it was surprising when I did, I could actually drive by the hospital without breaking into tears, where before I couldn't. If I went anywhere, even on the one street that goes by on the far side of the hospital, if I went anywhere close to that, I would become extremely emotional. And it was even worse if I went down the main one, where I could actually physically see the room that she was in. And that triggered some more memories and stuff like that. And I was able to put all of those in that box and kind of put them away.
I think though, and some people have asked us, or persons have asked us, okay, I'll put it into a person. These are persons who've asked us. And they look at us and go, well, what you guys are doing is counseling. Aren't you crossing a line? And I go, no, I'd like to bring to your attention is we don't say we're counselors or psychologists or anything. We're there to open up a conversation, right? So that you can understand it. And we're using a little story sharing. We're using some metaphors. We're just opening up the conversation, but we're not giving you an answer. We're not giving you a recommended practice. We're not any of those kind of things. Share anything there that you'd like to share with people. So
it's a common myth that mentoring can be or is like counseling, or is or can be like the service that a psychologist or a psychiatrist would provide. It is a myth that it is, similar to a social worker or anything like that. It's not. And what we said at the beginning of this podcast is that the idea behind it is to be there in between those professional caregivers meetings with that particular individual. It's there to listen and hear what that person wants to share. And it's not that you're going to pass judgment on what they've said. And it's not that you're going to say, I think you need to go and see so-and-so. It's none of that. What you will find is when you've been practicing as a mentor in this field is that there are certain things that you can ask or say that are purely mentoring in nature that will help them feel safe, that will help them feel comfortable in opening up. And a good example was or is that I'm working with a new young entrepreneur, and within 10 minutes of us starting to have a conversation, I disclosed that I was dealing with post-traumatic stress, that I was also dealing with grief on top of it. And as a result of me sharing, which is part of the mentoring process, because what we always teach is in order to build trust, you may have to share something personal about yourself, which I did. Lo and behold, it opened up the door for that individual to reach out and say, I need help, and help in a number of ways. But to be able to say, I've been diagnosed with this, and this, and I'm seeing these professional people, and me basically saying, I don't, I want to be able to go with you on your healing journey. I'm here to support you. I will listen and hear. I will be non-judgmental. And, I have my own experiences, which are unique to me, but I can still, if we need to talk about those, we can certainly do that. But the big thing is, I do not cross that line at all.
Yeah. And I think it's important for us to state that categorically. We're not saying cross a line, folks. We're just saying there are tools and techniques and tips and that you can use from a mentoring point of view that can allow an unfolding relationship that is a benefit to both. And it can sort of fill in, right? I sometimes use the analogy of life as like life sometimes is like Swiss cheese, and some Swiss cheese holes are very small, but some are really big. And sometimes in the mental health area, some of them are really big that big trucks can drive through them. And I think that's what Doug and I, when we're having some of our conversation, we're going, how can we shrink some of these things and provide a way for persons to get some benefit. So what we did was we actually created certification that brings forward the notion of the Certificate of Competence Mentor, which is sort of a general approach. And then we talked about creating something called the Journey Mentor. So a certificate of competence as a journey mentor. And if you pick up on the language, journey, the mentor is have someone who can be on the journey with you and understand just a little bit more about what journey means and the meaning we derive from walking together and how that might unfold, to deal with topics. Doug mentioned, triggers that happen every once in a while. I even get triggered a little bit if I'm watching a bit of TV, or I happen to watch something about YouTube and I see certain things linked to what I've experienced before. All of a sudden it'll well up and I go, oh no, there's a way to deal with that. All right. And I know another one of them that sort of pops out is grief. You mentioned it, with the passing of your wife. And there are those things that we have to take into consideration when we're moving forward, right? And having someone who is a mentor around you is a really great way. And I think sometimes we miss, and Doug hinted at this, with it's an entrepreneur who has some stories going on. There's a lot of entrepreneurs, who maybe because of something that's happened to them are going to become an entrepreneur. The story of that grief, the story of things that happen in their life gets them to think about becoming a social entrepreneur. And sometimes they haven't dealt with the background stories. And we pick up on that as well. And that's one of the things that we want to bring to your attention. And that's why we wanted to do the sort of broadcast to sort of bring some of this to the foreground again. We're certainly not touching everything, right, Doug? It's right. There are more for us to help out. There's other videos that we have shot that are in our YouTube channel on International Mentoring Community. Certainly encourage you to go over there and pick up some more. If there's comments that come in, or when comments come in, maybe let me do it that way, that are looking for more insights or more tools, techniques, we can certainly bring those forward. We certainly encourage you to get involved with the International Mentoring Community, because this is a way for us to be of assistance. And we certainly could use a lot more journey mentors that could help out around the world and some of the things that are unfolding. So we certainly encourage you to get involved with what we're doing. But I think, Doug, maybe that sort of gives us, we've talked about mentoring, the definition, we've gone over mental health, PTSD, OSI, made some comparison, gave some of our own stories, right? And we're willing to share, right? And sort of get at it from the role of the mentor and getting at things like coping skills and triggers and some of the topics that are there. That's what we've covered today. But like all videos that we do in the Mentoring Lounge is from the International Mentoring Community point of view. I tend to do the opening. Doug gets to do the closing off. So what would you like to share with us to take us out? And when I know that you're done, I'll just say take care, and then I'm going to end the stream. So Doug, your thoughts you want to close out with?
Yes, the one thing that stands out for me, from our whole conversation today, is the aspect of that there is the stigmatism around mental health, where people are reluctant to reach out. And the analogy that I use is to come out of their closet and reach out and say, I need help. And if there's nothing else that sticks with you after our conversation today, it's number one, that it's okay to ask for help. Number two, when someone does that and asks you for help, don't run the other way, but be there to walk beside them and be part of their healing journey. And together we can help deal with this massive silent pandemic that we're having in front of us today.
Okay, folks, take care.